The honourable member for Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's great to be back in the House after our Christmas recess and be able to address and speak with my colleagues. But just last week, Mr. Speaker, in Davos, the Prime Minister was singing the praises of Canada's system of banking regulation. Ironically, this comes at the same time as the government is all too happy to watch an important cornerstone of Canada's regulatory regime weaken due to the failure of the government to force banks to utilize the dispute resolution mechanism of the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. In October last year, TD followed RBC's lead in opting out of the OBSI dispute resolution mechanism and instead moved to using a private law firm handpicked by the bank to resolve complaints that could not be fixed by the in-house resolution system. The government spins this decision to let banks leave OBSI and deal with disputes through private firms as allowing choice in the marketplace. But choice for who, Mr. Speaker? It is clear it is not investors, consumers, or small businesses. These groups are stuck with the dispute resolution mechanism chosen for them by the banks. In fact, it's impossible to find members of those communities who support the government's position. The Canadian Foundation for Advancement of Investors sent an open letter to the Minister of Finance calling on the government to make the use of OBSI for dispute resolution mandatory, saying that, and I quote, "One single dispute resolution service provider is necessary in order to avoid fragmentation, inconsistencies, serious potential conflicts of interest, complaint, confusion, and enable the detection of systemic or widespread issues." The Consumer Council of Canada says that the withdrawal of TD and RBC from the banking side of OBSI, as I quote, "threatens the health of the system of dispute resolution and redress that has distinguished Canada during the current period of global economic disorder." Mr. Speaker, so instead of protecting their customers, the choice that this government is championing is for the banks. And when the banks are confronted with a choice between a comprehensive dispute resolution mechanism or a Bay Street law firm who are more interested in keeping the bank's business than in protecting consumers and small businesses, who do you think they will choose, Mr. Speaker? In October of last year, the same month as TD was allowed to walk away from OBSI, Canada signed a G20 accord on handling banking complaints which stated, "Resource to an independent redress process should be available to address complaints that are not efficiently resolved via the financial services providers and authorized agents' internal dispute resolution mechanisms." Mr. Speaker, how can the current process be independent if the banks get to choose who hears customers' complaints? Regulation should not be administered by Bay Street law firms on an issue which is as fundamental as the proper functioning of the economy and the banking sector. Consumers and small businesses will never be able to believe that their complaints will be properly addressed if the banks are stacking the odds in their own favour. In summary, Mr. Speaker, it is time for the government to match their words on banking regulation with action. The global economic recovery will rely on consumers and small businesses having confidence in the economy and the banking sector more generally. And in order to ensure confidence in the banking sector, small businesses and consumers must have access to single, independent dispute resolution service like OBSI. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I have mentioned previously here in this House, our Conservative government has shown a clear commitment to protecting Canadian consumers, particularly when it comes to financial and banking sectors. And we understand that Canadian families use financial products and services every single day, be it using a credit card when they're shopping, cashing a check, making a deposit at a bank, or paying off their mortgages. We believe Canadians deserve a system that is safe, that is secure, and that is fair. And that's why since 2006, we've enacted numerous measures to support consumers of financial products, measures that unfortunately the NDP actually opposed and voted against. This list includes measures like protecting consumers with new credit card rules, bringing in a code of conduct for the credit and debit card industry to help small businesses respond to unfair practices, banning negative option billing for financial products, and shortening the check holding period. Furthermore, we have made mortgage insurance more transparent, understandable, and affordable. We've also created a task force on financial literacy to help consumers make the right financial choices. And we've done much, much more, Mr. Speaker. In Budget 2011, the next phase of Canada's Economic Action Plan, we built on that record with more consumer-friendly measures. Let me cite them. Banning unsolicited credit card checks, moving to protect consumers of prepaid cards, and beginning to implement the task force on financial literacy's recommendations. Again, the NDP voted against every single one of those measures. In fact, with respect to the issue of the NDP member from Sudbury and what he's asking about today, he voted against a very important solution. Specifically, he voted against the Sustaining Canada's Economic Recovery Act. Now, currently, the Bank Act requires all banks to have dedicated procedures and personnel in place to address consumer concerns and complaints. In addition, it also requires that banks belong to a third-party dispute resolution body. However, there is a wide variation in terms of the procedures that are used, a concern shared by many consumers and our Conservative government. And to better protect Canadian consumers, the Sustaining Canada's Economic Recovery Act will force banks to belong to government-approved independent third-party bodies, which the member of the NDP failed to recognize. It will also establish uniform regulatory standards for internal complaint procedures and give the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada the authority to monitor and enforce compliance. These are things perhaps the member of the NDP missed when he voted against such an important measure. This will ensure that consumers receive consistent treatment and the highest level of protection. And despite the NDP opposition, we have passed that landmark legislation and are working to finalize regulations. Perhaps that explanation will allow the member to think more prudently when voting again on topics that might secure some protection for our Canadian consumers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with all that, I would like to also welcome my colleague back in our usual debates in the evening on this topic. What she was talking about, Mr. Speaker, was a long list of things that they've done, but all of those things, Mr. Speaker, have been proving ineffective time and time again. And what we have here, Mr. Speaker, with OBSI is an organization that's been put in place and has been around for a decade or so. It's already been in existence. And what this government needs to do is ensure that this independent organization, away from the banks, has the necessary regulation in place so we don't see further banks walking away, so we can protect our small businesses and our consumers when they have a dispute with the big banks. Right now, what this government is doing is favoring the big banks by allowing them to choose Bay Street law firms over independent organizations that actually protect consumers and small businesses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.